A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, the novelization. Chapter 7. "Where are you going?" asked Neil. He had to walk very fast to keep up with Nancy as she strode briskly across the hospital grounds.
"I don't know. I just know I can't stay here anymore,"
she replied honestly. "Why, because of Dr. Madalena? I'll straighten that out for you, Nancy. If I quit every time the Dragon Lady—"
"It's not just her. There's something going on here that I can't handle anymore. I thought I could help these kids, but now I'm not sure I can even help myself,"
interrupted Nancy. "I think you've already started to help them, though," said Neil. "And I have a funny feeling maybe they've started helping you too, Nancy." Nancy stopped and looked at Neil. She swallowed hard. Maybe he was right. Maybe. Then she remembered Kristen's bloody arm and everything that had happened since she started working at Weston Hills. No, she was hurting these kids by staying here, and they had already endured more hurt than anyone deserved to endure in a lifetime.
"Give a girl a ride?"
said Nancy. "Where to?"
"The bus station."
Neil looked at her for a long moment and then shrugged his shoulders. She followed him to his car, climbed into the front seat, and fell asleep. When she opened her eyes, they were pulling into Neil's driveway.
"I don't see any greyhounds,"
said Nancy. "I keep 'em in the bedroom," he replied. Nancy looked at Neil. Then she looked at the house for a moment and smiled.
"Show me,"
she said. They lay still in each other's arms for a long time before Nancy broke the silence.
"Have you ever thought of suicide?"
she asked. Neil sighed and shook his head. "Am I that lousy in bed? Geez," he asked. Nancy smiled and kissed him tenderly on the lips.
"As a matter of fact, you're incredible in bed. I guess my timing is just a little off."
"Your timing was perfect," said Neil with a big smile.
"You know what I mean."
Nancy gave him a playful slap on the arm. "Do you think about suicide a lot?" asked Neil, suddenly turning serious. Nancy shrugged.
"It's a way out, isn't it?"
"Yeah, for cowards, maybe."
"I don't think it's all that easy. If it were, a lot more people would do it."
Nancy paused and gazed thoughtfully at the ceiling.
"The only reason I haven't killed myself already is that I have no guarantee he would leave me alone, even if I were dead."
"Who?" asked Neil, taking her face in his hands and turning it towards his.
"That man I told you about."
"Who, Kruger? But that's—"
"Crazy? You think I'm crazy, don't you?"
"Of course not," said Neil, but his answer came just a second too late.
"Let's go to sleep."
Nancy turned her back to Neil and almost immediately fell into a deep sleep. Nancy awoke moments later to the sound of a dripping faucet. She slipped out of bed and followed the sound to the bathroom. The faucet was dripping blood, and the basin was already filled with the scarlet liquid. Nancy closed the faucet and became aware of a louder dripping behind her. She turned and saw that the bathtub too was filled with blood that continued to spurt in thick globs from the faucet. She stepped forward to shut the leak and saw the faces in the shower curtain. "Help us!" they moaned. Nancy stared in horror at the faces of Philip and Jennifer, their dead eyes staring at her from somewhere beyond the thick white vinyl, their bloody faces pressed tight against the heavy fabric. "Kill him, Nancy, kill him!" they said. "Kill him before he kills us all!"
"We've got his claws,"
said Nancy, desperate to believe that her terrible work was finally done. "Use them," said the voices. "Kill him by his own hand." She was about to speak when the curtain began to move, the curtain hooks making a horrible screeching sound as they scraped against the metal rod. It wasn't until she saw the bloody, clawed hand emerge from behind the curtain that Nancy began to scream. "What's wrong?" asked Neil, shaking her roughly by the shoulders as she sat up beside him in bed. Nancy's eyes snapped open. She stared in horror at the closed bathroom door, her heart pounding violently in her chest.
I have to go to the hospital right away,
said Nancy, certain now that she would never leave this place until the job she had begun on Elm Street was finally completed. I can't believe what you're telling me, said Neil, following Nancy down the corridor to Dr. Madalena's office. You're not talking about dreaming as any sane person knows it.
I'm talking about the dream as reality,
said Nancy.
Dreams that you can touch, taste, feel, and even get killed in.
I'm sorry, that sounds like bullshit to me, said Neil.
Tell that to Philip and Jennifer,
replied Nancy. But they're both dead. Neil stopped in mid-sentence.
Now open the door.
Neil looked at the door to Dr. Madalena's office and shook his head. This is crazy, he said. Do you know she's already thinking of filing criminal charges against you?
She stole something from me, and I want it back. Now open the door.
Neil hesitated for a moment and then unlocked the door with his master key. He stood guard outside while Nancy rifled the desk drawers.
They've got to be here,
she muttered, carelessly tossing aside books and papers as she searched for the deadly claw. Then she noticed the wall safe, its door slightly ajar. She crossed the room and threw open the door. Joey's head stared back at her, his eyes wide and glassy. "He's got them back," said Joey as Nancy began to scream. Neil rushed to the safe and saw only a slight smear of blood. He turned around and saw Nancy racing down the hall toward the group therapy room. Nancy peeked into the room and saw that Dr. Madalena was leading the session herself. It was clear from the expression on her face that she was getting nowhere fast. "Kincaid," said Dr. Madalena, singling out the boy whom she perceived as being the closest thing this motley group of disturbed adolescents had to a leader. "Why don't you tell us what's been happening these past few days, "Why don't you eat shit and die?" suggested Kincaid. Dr. Madalena stared at him for a long moment and decided to try a different approach. Perhaps, she thought, one of the less aggressive children would be more inclined to cooperate. "Taryn?" The girl just shrugged and shook her head slowly from side to side. Everyone was silent. "Anyone?" said Dr. Madalena in a tone of voice that clearly betrayed her mounting irritation. "Well," she said, rising to her feet after a few painfully long seconds, "if you'll excuse me, I believe I can find more constructive uses for my time." Nancy ducked into an open doorway as Dr. Madalena stormed down the hall. Every face in the room lit up when Nancy walked in a moment later. "Welcome back," said Kincaid, a big grin on his face. "I knew you wouldn't leave us," said Kristen, jumping from her seat to embrace her friend. The others followed Kristen's lead, and soon they were all crowding around Nancy, their faces glowing with renewed hope. She waited until they calmed down and then stepped back to speak.
"It's time for the final battle,"
said Nancy, all of a sudden sounding very much like a general addressing her troops. "Just tell us what to do," said Kincaid. Nancy smiled at the boy and nodded. For once, Dr. Madalena's instincts had been right. If Kincaid cooperated, the others would follow. Ultimately, however, Nancy's secret weapon was Kristen Parker. Nancy herself was the seasoned veteran in this campaign, but Kristen alone held the power needed to stop the enemy dead in his tracks.
"Come with me,"
said Nancy, holding out her hands as she lay down in the center of the floor. One by one the others joined her, their heads in the center and their arms linked to form a star. At that moment Neil Guinness appeared in the doorway. Nancy called for him, extending a hand in invitation. Neil stopped, not knowing what to say or do. He looked out into the hall, imagining what Dr. Madalena would say if she walked in and found him lying on the floor with Nancy and the kids. Then he looked at Nancy, so sure of herself, so confident that what she was doing wasn't so crazy as it appeared to be. I love this crazy lady, he thought, suddenly tempted to follow her lead despite all of his professional instincts to do the contrary. Maybe Nancy was crazy as a loon, but she seemed to share some fundamental understanding with these kids. That had continued to elude him despite his persistent effort to get through to them. If Nancy had some way, however unorthodox, of helping them work out whatever it was that was troubling them, Neil very much wanted to be a part of it. But now, as he gazed into Nancy's eyes, he saw an intensity of purpose and vision that was truly terrifying. Wherever she was headed with these kids, Neil was not yet ready to go. Slowly he shook his head no. Nancy nodded once and took a deep breath.
Kristen,
she said, forcing herself to dismiss Neil Guinness from her thoughts. Kristen nodded and closed her eyes. 10 seconds later she was fast asleep. Neil watched and allowed himself a slight smile. So that's what this is all about, he thought. He had seen plenty of group meditations in his time, and hadn't been impressed. What he had never seen before, though, was 6 people disappear before his astonished eyes. It was, he had to admit, damned impressive. And then they were on Elm Street, standing before the house they had all seen before in their worst nightmares.
That is it,
she said.
This is where he was born.
She continued while feeling an exhilarating sense of power.
And this is where he has to die.
What's the plan? Asked Kristen.
We move in fast. We find the son of a bitch, and we take his weapon.
And then?
Asked Turin. Then we kill the motherfucker with his own fucking claws, said Kincaid.
Let's go,
instructed Nancy.
And don't forget, stay together.
Turin was the last to enter the house. It wasn't that she was any more afraid than the others. Indeed, Turin was just as eager as any of them to get the battle underway. It was just her way to fall back and let others lead. All her life she had thought of herself as a follower. Her loyalty and courage were beyond reproach. Given a good cause, Turin always believed she would follow a strong leader into the gates of hell itself. And now she had. Turin was about to follow the others up the narrow staircase when she heard a familiar voice. "Sugar baby!" She stopped and turned around.
Grandma!
Unnoticed by the others, Turin strayed from the group and entered a small room that she had somehow overlooked before. A picture in an old-fashioned frame hung on the wall. Turin crossed the room and smiled. She had always loved that old photograph of herself as a baby, cradled in the strong arms of her loving grandmother. But what in the world was that picture doing? "Sugar baby!" Turin whirled around to see her grandmother, sitting in the big rocker that she always sat in when she was alive.
Grandma!
Said Turin, instinctively rushing into the old woman's loving arms. "I'm so glad you've come back," said the old woman, one strong arm around Turin's waist, while the other caressed her soft hair. "We were all just so worried when you ran away, little Turin."
I didn't run away, Grandma. I had these dreams, and then I had to go to the hospital.
She said. "I just missed you so much," said the woman in the rocking chair, as she tightened her grip on the girl's narrow waist.
Don't worry, Grandma. I'm never going to leave you again,
said Turin, feeling at peace for the first time in many months. "Oh, I know, dearie. In fact, you can bet your sweet ass on it," croaked Freddy Krueger, rocking contentedly as his gleaming blade sliced smoothly across the girl's screaming face. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Chapter 7 of A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, the novelization by Jeffrey Cooper. A lot of differences to go over here, but I really enjoyed this chapter. You know, it got a little confusing because I think the author kind of messed up a little bit, because at one point it had Dr. Madalena asking Joey a question, and I guess I just forgot to narrate that part. And then it said that Neil saw 6 people disappearing. But I think right now it should just be Kristen, Nancy, Taryn, Kincaid, and Laredo. That's the only people alive, right? Am I missing something? I mean, Joey died, and Philip died, and Jennifer died. So I think it was just a mess up by the author. I don't know. Let me know. I'm pretty sure that there was only 5 of them left. Neil would have made number 6, but he didn't lay down with them, and he watched them disappear, so it couldn't have been talking about him. But that aside, I really did enjoy the chapter. I thought the interaction between Nancy and Neil was really good. They actually went home and, they came together. And apparently Nancy thought he was good at his job. As far as the dream goes, I really enjoy the visualization. Wow, I can't talk today. That Jeffrey Cooper does. I mean, I feel like he had to squeeze in a lot into 100 pages to get all 3 of the novelizations of the first 3 movies into one book. But that's okay. I like how he described that one room in the Elm Street house changing, and it looking like Taryn's old grandmother's house, and everything's so different in this book. Taryn's death was so different. I did use a musical cue from her death in the movie for the part where her grandmother becomes Freddy. Not sure if anybody noticed that or not, but that's what that music is there that kicks in when Freddy, morphs from the grandmother into Freddy. But yeah, I thought her death in this book was kind of even more brutal than it was in the movie, and the reason for that is Freddy using a loved one to lure her in and then being killed. She was pretty much being killed by her grandmother. She was lured into insecurity by this memory of her grandmother, all these loving memories of her, and that ends up being her undoing. In my opinion, that's more brutal. Being killed by someone you love, or at least being lured in by that memory, and that being the last thing you think of as you're dying. So I thought that was pretty brutal. It was kind of quick and everything, but still I thought it was, I'm not saying I hate it. So far I do enjoy aspects of the movie better than the book, but I would not have hated this if this was how the movie had turned out. If I had never seen the Dream Warriors that we know, and this is what we had, I wouldn't have been disappointed at all. A couple other things I want to discuss. Dr. Madalena. There's only 3 chapters left, but man, she has got to go. Something's got to happen to her. Whether Nancy just up and kills her because she's sick and tired of her bullshit, or Freddy somehow gets her. I keep hoping something will happen, but it seems like she's becoming more and more of a minor character as we move along. But every time she appears, man, she pisses me off. Little disappointed that Neil's character had a chance tonight to step up and be more like the Neil from the movie. And it seemed like he was going to do it, that he would follow that crazy girl anywhere. And then at the last second, he's like, no, y'all go ahead. But I am happy that he actually saw them all instantly disappear. And I look forward to Chapter 8 to see how he's going to handle that. Because everything he thinks he knows and thinks he believes in has just been proven to be the exact opposite. So I want to see how that goes. If Neil gets a chance to talk to Nancy again and, make up for his mistake of not trusting her and not believing her. And I'll be back with that chapter very soon. I hope you guys are enjoying the book, and I'll see you very soon with Chapter 8. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and, as always, pleasant dreams!